Admiral Vex of the Hegemony High Command stared at the reports covering his desk. 3 months of losses, destroyed convoys, and terrified crews, all caused by a single human ship that appeared and disappeared like a ghost. His patience had finally run out. "Enough," he growled, his clawed hands crushing the datapad in his grip. "Set the trap." The trap was simple and cruel, exactly the kind of thing the Hegemony excelled at. They would use a prison transport carrying captured human civilians from the recently conquered Darwin system. The ship would follow a predictable route through the Vega system, escorted by only a few light cruisers, too tempting for any human captain to ignore. But waiting in the asteroid field near Vega would be the largest ambush force ever assembled. 2 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, and a full fighter wing. Enough firepower to destroy a small fleet, all focused on eliminating one troublesome transport ship. Captain Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Defiance, studying the intelligence report Chris Turner had obtained from his contacts in the merchant fleet. The prison ship's route was too convenient, its escort too light, and its timing too perfect. "It's obviously a trap," Morrison said calmly. Katie Walsh looked up from her weapons console. "So we're going to ignore it?" Morrison turned to face his crew. Sam Rodriguez was monitoring the engine readouts, his fingers dancing over controls that had been rebuilt 3 times in the past month. Dr. Park was reviewing medical supplies, preparing for whatever came next. Chris Turner was plotting hyperspace routes with the focused intensity of a master chess player. "No," Morrison replied. "We're going to spring it." Sam Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. "Captain, the intelligence reports suggest they have enough firepower to level a small moon. Are you sure about this?" Morrison walked to the tactical display, which showed the Vega system in 3 dimensions. Red dots marked the suspected positions of enemy ships hiding in the asteroid field. It was a perfect ambush. Position with multiple escape routes and excellent sensor coverage. "They think they understand us," Morrison said. "They think humans are predictable, that we'll always try to save innocent people even when it's clearly a trap. They're counting on our compassion to make us stupid." Dr. Park spoke from her position at the medical station. "But those prisoners will be executed if we don't act. The Hegemony doesn't keep human civilians alive for very long." "Exactly," Morrison replied, "which is why we're going to save them. But not the way the enemy expects." Over the next 6 hours, Morrison outlined his plan to the crew. It was insane, dangerous, and relied on perfect timing from every member of the team. It was also the kind of plan that no coalition officer would ever consider, which made it perfectly human. The USS Defiance dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Vega system, exactly where the Hegemony expected it. Long-range sensors immediately detected the prison transport and its light escort, moving slowly through the outer system toward a jump point that would take them deeper into enemy territory. Admiral Vex watched from his command ship hidden in the asteroids as the human vessel began its approach. "Predictable," he muttered with satisfaction. "Humans always try to be heroes." But something was wrong. The ship's approach pattern was different from what they had observed in previous attacks. Instead of using stealth and surprise, the USS Defiance was broadcasting its presence openly, almost like it wanted to be detected. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "the human ship is transmitting on all frequencies. They're demanding the immediate release of the prisoners." Admiral Vex laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the bridge. "Let them come closer. When they're in range, we'll show them what happens to ships that challenge the Hegemony." The USS Defiance continued its approach, moving at what seemed like a reckless speed directly toward the prison transport. But Captain Morrison was watching, his tactical displays carefully, noting the positions of hidden enemy ships as they prepared to spring their trap. "Katie, are you ready?" he asked quietly. "All systems green," Katie Walsh replied. "The surprise packages are loaded and waiting." The surprise packages were Sam Rodriguez's latest innovation, automated cargo pods that had been converted into unmanned attack drones. They weren't sophisticated, but they didn't need to be. They just needed to confuse enemy sensors and draw fire away from the real threat. At exactly the right moment, Morrison gave the order. Launch the packages. 20 cargo pods detached from the USS Defiance and spread out in different directions. Each one was equipped with basic weapons, shield generators, and a simple AI programmed to attack anything that shot at it. To enemy sensors, it looked like the human ship had suddenly multiplied into an entire squadron. Admiral Vex realized immediately that something was wrong. All ships, open fire! Destroy everything! The hegemony ambush force revealed itself, emerging from hiding places throughout the asteroid field. Energy beams and missiles filled space as they tried to engage multiple targets simultaneously, but the cargo pod drones were small, fast, and programmed to be as annoying as possible. While the enemy was distracted, the USS Defiance activated its stealth plating and disappeared from sensors. The ship that had been broadcasting loudly just moments before was now completely invisible, free to move through the battle space without being detected. Morrison had studied the enemy's tactics for months, learning their patterns and weaknesses. Hegemony commanders were trained to think in terms of overwhelming firepower and direct confrontation. They expected enemies to either run away or fight back conventionally. What they didn't expect was for the USS Defiance to ignore their battleships completely and focus on rescuing the prisoners first. The prison transport was lightly defended, with only 2 escort cruisers for protection. Katie Walsh's weapons systems made short work of both ships, disabling their engines and weapons without destroying them completely. Morrison wanted survivors to witness what happened next. Chris Turner brought the USS Defiance alongside the prison transport, using docking clamps to lock the 2 ships together. Sam Rodriguez began cutting through the transport's hull with industrial lasers, while Dr. Park prepared to treat any injured prisoners. The rescue operation took exactly 12 minutes. 300 human civilians were transferred to specially prepared areas of the USS Defiance, including families with children who had been captured when the Darwin system fell to hegemony forces, but Morrison wasn't finished. While his crew was rescuing prisoners, he had been studying the enemy fleet's formation and tactics. The hegemony ships were powerful but predictable, designed to fight other conventional warships in straightforward battles. All prisoners secured, Dr. Park reported. Ready to disengage? Not yet, Morrison replied. Katie, show them what we've really become. The USS Defiance detached from the prison transport and reappeared on enemy sensors, but now it was different. The ship's hull began opening in sections that had never existed before, revealing hidden weapon bays, additional shield generators, and thrust systems that could push the vessel to impossible speeds. What had looked like a simple transport ship was actually a predator in disguise, rebuilt from the inside out to be something no enemy had ever encountered before. The battle that followed became known throughout the galaxy as the Vega Massacre. The USS Defiance moved through the hegemony fleet like death itself, using tactics that no conventional military mind could have conceived. Katie Walsh's integrated weapons network could engage multiple targets simultaneously while maintaining defensive fire against incoming threats. The ship would appear to be disabled, only to unleash devastating firepower when enemies moved in for the kill. It would seem to retreat, only to circle back and attack from an unexpected angle. Sam Rodriguez's power system modifications allowed the ship to channel energy in ways that defied physics. Weapons that should have overheated fired continuously. Shields that should have failed absorbed impossible amounts of damage. Chris Turner's navigation system, enhanced by the ship's learning AI, made the USS Defiance nearly impossible to hit. The ship could predict enemy movements, anticipate their tactics, and position itself for maximum advantage. Dr. Park's medical enhancements had turned the human crew into something beyond normal human capabilities. They could process information at superhuman speeds, function under crushing stress, and make split-second decisions that saved lives and won battles. When the smoke cleared an hour later, the hegemony ambush force had been completely destroyed. 2 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, and 36 fighters had been reduced to drifting wreckage. The USS Defiance had suffered only minor damage to its outer hull. Admiral Vex had survived long enough to send one final message to hegemony, high command, before his ship exploded. The humans have become something we cannot understand or defeat. May the gods help us all. Captain Morrison stood on his bridge, looking out at the debris field that had once been a proud enemy fleet. The FAF. Rescued prisoners were safe in specially prepared compartments, receiving medical care and food. His crew was already planning their next move against hegemony forces. "Chris, plot a course for Coalition space," Morrison ordered. "It's time to show them what we've learned." The USS Defiance had evolved from a forgotten transport ship into humanity's answer to an impossible war. It was proof that news of the battle at Kepler 442b spread through the galaxy faster than light itself. Within 3 days, every major news network was running stories about the mysterious ship that had destroyed an entire hegemony raiding force in less than 20 minutes. Coalition Command was not pleased. Admiral Harrison called Captain Morrison on the ship's communication system, his face red with anger on the main screen. "Morrison, what the hell do you think you're doing? You were ordered to avoid engagement with enemy forces. That was a direct violation of your mission parameters." Morrison stood calmly on his bridge, surrounded by his crew. "Sir, I received a distress call from a colony under attack. Coalition protocol requires all vessels to render assistance to civilian populations in danger." "Don't quote regulations at me, Captain. You know damn well that transport vessels are supposed to wait for proper military backup. I want you to return to Starbase Alpha immediately for debriefing and ship inspection." Morrison looked at his crew. Sam Rodriguez was grinning while he monitored the engine systems. Katie Walsh had her hand resting on the weapons controls, ready for anything. Chris Turner was already plotting courses to several different star systems. Dr. Park was reviewing medical supplies, preparing for whatever came next. "I'm afraid that won't be possible, Admiral," Morrison replied politely. "We've received reports of hegemony activity in this sector. As the only coalition vessel in the area, we feel obligated to investigate." Admiral Harrison's face turned an even deeper shade of red. "That's a direct order, Morrison. Return to base immediately or face court-martial for insubordination." Morrison reached over and turned off the communication system. The screen went dark, leaving the bridge in comfortable silence. "Well," Chris Turner said cheerfully, "I guess we're officially rogue now." "Good," Morrison replied. "I was getting tired of taking orders from people who don't understand how to fight a war." The USS Defiance had spent 3 months being rebuilt from the inside out. Now it was time to put those modifications to real use. Morrison gathered his crew in the briefing room to discuss their new mission. "The Coalition is losing this war," he began, "because they're fighting it like a peacekeeping operation. They file diplomatic protests when colonies are attacked. They launch carefully planned counterattacks that give the enemy plenty of time to escape. They worry more about following regulations than about winning battles." Katie Walsh leaned forward in her chair. "So what do we do about it?" "We fight like humans," Morrison replied. "We use guerrilla tactics. We hit them where they don't expect it. We make them afraid to leave their bases without heavy escort." Sam Rodriguez pulled up a map of the sector on his datapad. "The hegemony has supply convoys running between their occupied systems. Fuel, ammunition, spare parts, all the things they need to keep their war machine running." "Exactly," Morrison said. "And those convoys are lightly defended because they don't expect anyone to attack them this far behind enemy lines." Dr. Park spoke up from her position at the end of the table. "What about Coalition Command? They're not going to just ignore us." "Let them try to find us," Chris Turner said with a laugh. "I know routes through this sector that aren't on any official charts. We can appear anywhere in the galaxy without warning and disappear just as quickly." Morrison stood up and walked to the window that looked out into space. The hegemony thinks they understand how humans fight. They expect us to follow coalition doctrine, to fight fair and clean and predictable. We're going to show them how wrong they are. The hunt began 2 days later when they intercepted a hegemony supply convoy near the Rigel system. 12 cargo, ships protected by 2 escort cruisers carrying weapons and ammunition to enemy forces on the front lines. The USS Defiance appeared out of nowhere, its stealth plating making it invisible until it was already within weapons range. Katie Walsh's hidden missile systems opened fire first, crippling the escort cruisers before they could react. Then the modified mining lasers went to work, surgically destroying the cargo ship's engines and leaving them helpless. But Morrison wasn't interested in simply destroying supplies. He wanted to send a message. "Chris, bring us alongside the lead cargo ship. Sam, prepare boarding equipment." The crew of the USS Defiance had practiced this maneuver during their modifications. Within minutes, they had cut through the cargo ship's airlock and were moving through its corridors. The hegemony crew surrendered without a fight, terrified by the sudden appearance of human soldiers who moved with deadly precision. Morrison walked onto the bridge of the captured ship and faced the alien captain. The hegemony officer was tall and thin, with gray skin and large black eyes that showed fear and confusion. "I am Captain Morrison of the human vessel USS Defiance," he said calmly. "You will deliver a message to your superiors." The alien captain nodded quickly, eager to cooperate. "Tell them that humans are no longer bound by coalition rules of engagement. Tell them that we will hunt their ships wherever they go. Tell them that they should be afraid of the dark between stars because that's where we live now." Morrison left the alien captain alive but destroyed all the cargo ships and their escorts. He wanted survivors to carry his message back to Hegemony Command. Over. The following weeks, the USS Defiance became a ghost story that spread through enemy-occupied space. Supply convoys would disappear without a trace. Communication relay stations would go silent. Remote outposts would be found abandoned. Their crews vanished. The ship never stayed in one place long enough to be tracked. Chris Turner's knowledge of secret hyperspace routes allowed them to appear anywhere in the sector without warning. They would strike fast and hard, then disappear before enemy reinforcements could arrive. Sam Rodriguez continued upgrading the ship's systems, incorporating salvaged hegemony technology into their already impressive arsenal. Enemy shield generators, weapons systems, even computer cores were stripped from destroyed ships and integrated into the USS Defiance. Katie Walsh developed new tactics for each attack. Sometimes they would disable enemy ships and interrogate the crews for intelligence. Sometimes they would destroy everything and leave no survivors. The unpredictability made the hegemony forces paranoid and afraid. Dr. Park created new medical protocols that pushed human capabilities even further. The crew could now function for days without sleep, maintain perfect accuracy under extreme stress, and recover from injuries that would incapacitate normal people. The hegemony began calling them the Ghost Ship and posted massive bounties for information about their location. Enemy commanders started demanding heavy escorts for routine supply runs. Some outposts were abandoned entirely because their crews refused to serve in areas where the mysterious human ship had been spotted. Coalition Command officially listed the USS Defiance as missing in action, but Admiral Harrison secretly hoped they would continue their unauthorized campaign. The results were undeniable. Hegemony operations in the sector were being disrupted and enemy morale was dropping rapidly. But Captain Morrison had bigger plans than simple hit-and-run attacks. He was studying enemy tactics, learning their weaknesses, and preparing for something that would change the course of the entire war. "They think they know us," he told his crew during one of their planning sessions. "They think humans are predictable, that we follow patterns they can understand. We're going to show them how wrong they are." The USS Defiance had evolved from a forgotten transport ship into something unique in the galaxy, a predator that hunted the hunters. Every successful attack made the crew more confident and the ship more deadly. Morrison looked at the tactical displays showing Hegemony Fleet. Movements throughout the sector. Enemy ships were grouping together for protection, abandoning isolated positions, and changing their patrol routes daily. They were acting like prey animals, constantly looking over their shoulders for a threat they couldn't see coming. Phase 1 is complete, Morrison announced to his crew. We've gotten their attention. Now it's time for Phase 2. Katie Walsh looked up from her weapons controls. What's Phase 2, Captain? Morrison smiled, but there was no warmth in his expression. We're going to teach them what it means to be afraid of humans. The alarm woke Captain Morrison from a deep sleep. He rolled out of his bunk and grabbed his uniform, pulling it on as he ran toward the bridge. The red emergency lights were flashing, casting everything in an angry glow. "Report!" he called out. As he entered the command center, Chris Turner looked up from his navigation console, his face grim. "Distress signal from Kepler 442b, sir. The mining colony there is under attack. Hegemony raiders hit their outer defenses an hour ago and are moving toward the planet." Morrison felt his stomach drop. Kepler 442b was home to 50,000 people, mostly miners and their families. It was a peaceful world that had never bothered anyone. The kind of place the Hegemony liked to attack because they knew the defenders would be weak. "How far out are we?" Morrison asked. 30 minutes at maximum speed, Chris replied. "But sir, the nearest coalition fleet is 6 hours away. We're supposed to wait for backup before engaging enemy forces." Morrison looked at the tactical display, showing the Hegemony attack force. 3 heavy cruisers and 12 fighters, all moving steadily toward the defenseless planet. By the time coalition reinforcements arrived, there would be nothing left to save. "What's our current status, Sam?" Morrison called down to the engine room through the intercom. Sam Rodriguez's voice crackled back through the speakers. "All systems, green, Captain. The new power core is running smooth as silk. We can give you everything you need." Morrison turned to Katie Walsh at the weapons station. "Katie, what do we have for firepower?" Katie grinned, her fingers dancing over the control panels. Officially, 2 plasma cannons that couldn't scratch paint off a shuttle. Unofficially, enough hidden surprises to ruin someone's whole day. Dr. Park's voice came from the medical bay. "Captain, I've prepared combat stimulants for the crew. We can function at peak efficiency, even under extreme stress." Morrison looked around at his crew. 3 months ago, they had been failures assigned to a worthless ship. Now they were the only thing standing between 50,000 innocent people and certain death. "Chris, plot a course for Kepler 442b. Maximum speed." "Sir, coalition regulations clearly state that light transport vessels should avoid engagement with superior enemy forces." Morrison smiled coldly. "Then it's a good thing we're not a light transport vessel anymore. We're something else entirely." The USS Defiance dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler system. The scene that greeted them was exactly what Morrison had expected. The Hegemony ships were in orbit around the planet, their energy weapons carving deep scars into the surface. Explosions bloomed like deadly flowers as mining facilities and residential areas were destroyed. The enemy had not noticed their arrival yet. The Defiance looked like exactly what it was supposed to be, an old cargo ship that had wandered into the wrong place at the wrong time. The Hegemony commander probably thought it was a refugee vessel trying to escape the attack. "Katie, activate the stealth plating," Morrison ordered. "Stealth plating active," Katie replied. "We're invisible to their sensors now." The USS Defiance disappeared from every detection system the Hegemony possessed. To their instruments, the old transport ship had simply vanished. They had no idea that death was approaching them at high speed. Morrison studied the tactical situation. The 3 Hegemony cruisers were spread out in a loose formation around the planet, each one focusing on a different section of the surface. Their fighter escort was scattered, some providing air cover while others strafed ground targets. "Chris, bring us in behind the nearest cruiser. Stay in their sensor shadow." "Understood, Captain. We'll be in weapons range in 2 minutes." Morrison activated the ship's internal communications system. "All hands, this is the captain." We are about to engage a superior enemy force in defense of an innocent planet. Remember your training, trust your equipment, and show these aliens what humans can do when they get angry. The USS Defiance closed to within 500 meters of the nearest hegemony cruiser before Katie opened fire. The hidden missile tubes in the cargo bay opened simultaneously, launching a barrage of high-explosive warheads directly into the enemy ship's engine section. The hegemony cruiser had shields, but they were designed to stop energy weapons fired from long range. Nobody had ever considered the possibility of physical missiles launched from point-blank distance. The warheads punched through the shields like they were made of paper and tore massive holes in the ship's hull. Before the enemy could react, Katie's modified mining lasers came online. The point defense systems carved through the cruiser's armor plating with surgical precision, targeting critical systems and cutting the ship apart from the inside. The hegemony cruiser tried to turn and bring its main weapons to bear, but Chris Turner had anticipated that move. The USS Defiance was already sliding sideways, using maneuvering thrusters that no transport ship should have possessed. The ship's AI, learning and adapting in real time, began predicting enemy targeting patterns. It fed course corrections to Chris faster than any human pilot could react, keeping the Defiance always one step ahead of enemy weapons fire. Dr. Park's combat stimulants were flowing through the crew's bloodstreams, sharpening their reflexes and eliminating fatigue. Sam Rodriguez's power system modifications kept the weapons firing without overheating. Everything worked exactly as planned. The first hegemony cruiser exploded in a brilliant flash of light. Debris scattered in all directions, some pieces large enough to damage nearby fighters. "One down, 2 to go," Katie announced calmly. The other hegemony ships had finally realized they were under attack, but they still could not see their attacker. Their sensors showed empty space where the USS Defiance should have been. They began firing wildly in all directions, hoping to hit something. Morrison watched the enemy panic with grim satisfaction. "Chris, take us after the fighter screen. Let's thin them out before the big ships get organized." The USS Defiance carved through the hegemony fighters like a shark among minnows. The enemy pilots had trained to fight other fighters and large warships. They had no idea how to deal with an invisible enemy that moved like nothing they had ever encountered. Katie's weapons systems had evolved during the months of modifications. She could now control an integrated network of missiles, energy weapons, and defensive systems all at the same time. The ship could engage multiple targets while maintaining defensive fire against incoming threats. Within 10 minutes, the entire fighter screen had been destroyed. 12 hegemony pilots who had been terrorizing innocent civilians were now drifting in space as frozen corpses. The 2 remaining cruisers tried to work together, coordinating their fire to create overlapping fields of destruction. But Chris Turner's navigation skills, enhanced by the ship's predictive AI, made the USS Defiance nearly impossible to hit. The ship would appear to be moving in one direction, then suddenly shift course at the last second. It would seem to be retreating, only to circle back and attack from an unexpected angle. The hegemony gunners found themselves firing at shadows while their own ships were systematically destroyed. The second cruiser died when Katie managed to plant a missile directly in its reactor core. The explosion was so bright that it temporarily overloaded the visual sensors on the remaining enemy ship. The last hegemony cruiser tried to run, but it was too late. The USS Defiance had been designed for cargo runs between distant stars. It was fast enough to catch anything and tough enough to survive whatever they threw at it. Katie's final attack was almost artistic in its precision. She disabled the enemy ship's engines first, leaving it helpless and drifting. Then she systematically destroyed its weapons, communication systems, and life support. The crew had time to think about what was happening to them before the final missile ended their existence. Morrison looked at the tactical display, which now showed empty space where the hegemony attack force had been. Time elapsed. 18 minutes, 43 seconds, Chris reported. 18 minutes to destroy 3 heavy cruisers and 12 fighters. Morrison felt a strange mixture of pride and horror at what they had accomplished. "Open a channel to the planet," he ordered. The face of a frightened colonial administrator appeared on the main screen. "This is Governor Martinez of Kepler 442b. Who is this? What happened to the hegemony ships?" "This is Captain Morrison of the USS Defiance. The threat has been eliminated. Your people are safe." The governor stared at him in confusion. "But you're just a transport ship. How did you—" Morrison cut the transmission. There would be time for explanations later. Right now, he needed to think about what came next. "Chris, plot a course for the outer system. Best speed." "Where are we going, Captain?" Morrison looked around at his crew, seeing the same realization in their eyes that he felt in his heart. They had crossed a line today. They were no longer just coalition personnel following orders. They had become something new and dangerous. "We're going hunting," he said simply. Sam Rodriguez stood in the engine room at 3 in the morning, surrounded by tools and spare parts. He had been working for 18 hours straight, but his eyes were bright with excitement. The ship's power system lay open before him like a patient on an operating table. "This is all wrong," he muttered to himself, pulling out another section of power conduit. Completely wrong. The coalition engineers who had designed the ship thought like bureaucrats. Everything had to be safe, standardized and approved by committee. They had built redundancy on top of redundancy, creating a system that would never fail catastrophically, but would never perform at full potential either. Sam saw the problem immediately. Power flowed through the ship like water through a garden. Hose with too many bends. By the time electricity reached the weapons or engines, half of it had been lost to resistance and safety buffers. It was like trying to fill a bucket with a drinking straw. He began rerouting the main power lines, bypassing the safety systems that treated the crew like children who could not be trusted with dangerous equipment. Humans had been working with electricity for centuries. They knew how to handle it safely without computer babysitters monitoring every circuit. The work was dangerous. One mistake could electrocute him or cause an explosion that would gut the engine room. But Sam had been doing this kind of work since he was 12 years old, helping his father repair mining equipment on the colony world where he grew up. His hands moved with practiced confidence as he spliced new connections and installed upgraded components. Meanwhile, Katie Walsh was in the weapons bay, staring at the 2 pathetic plasma cannons that were supposed to protect them from enemy attack. She had read the technical specifications 3 times, hoping she had misunderstood something. But no, the weapons really were that weak. "These things couldn't hurt a shuttle," she said to Chris Turner, who was helping her inventory their equipment. "A determined bird could probably fly through the plasma beam without getting singed." Chris laughed. "Maybe that's the point. Coalition doctrine says to avoid fights whenever possible. These weapons are designed to make surrender look like a reasonable option." Katie pulled up the ship's cargo bay schematics on her datapad. The bays were large, designed to carry containers of supplies to remote colonies, but they could carry other things too, more interesting things. "What if we installed missile tubes here?" she asked, pointing to a section near the rear of the ship. "Hidden inside the cargo bay walls. From the outside, it would still look like a harmless transport." Chris studied the plans. "It could work. The structural supports are strong enough to handle the recoil. And I know where to get missiles that officially fell off the back of a military transport." Katie grinned. "What about point defense systems? If we're going to pick fights with serious warships, we'll need to deal with their fighters and missiles." "Mining lasers," Chris suggested. "They're not classified as weapons, so nobody regulates them. But with some modifications, they could cut enemy fighters in half." Dr. Park was working in her own area, the medical bay. She had studied human physiology for years, but she had never been allowed to push the boundaries of what the human body could accomplish. Coalition medical protocols were designed for safety above all else, which meant accepting limitations that might not actually exist. She began designing new medical procedures specifically for combat situations, stimulants that could keep a person, alert and focused for days without harmful side effects, reaction enhancers that could make human reflexes faster than most alien species, pain suppressors that would allow someone to keep fighting even when injured. The key was understanding that human bodies were not like alien bodies. Humans had evolved as persistence hunters, capable of pushing themselves far beyond what seemed reasonable. They could function on minimal sleep, ignore pain when necessary, and maintain focus under extreme stress. Dr. Park wanted to enhance those natural abilities rather than suppress them. She also redesigned the medical bay itself. Coalition medical facilities were clean, bright, and comfortable. They looked like hospitals. But in combat, what you needed was a trauma center that could keep people alive long enough to get proper treatment later. Dr. Park installed backup, power systems, redundant life support equipment, and medical supplies in hidden compartments throughout the ship. If the main medical bay was damaged, she could set up emergency treatment areas anywhere on the ship. Chris Turner was the crew member with the most connections in the gray areas of space commerce. During his years as a merchant marine, he had learned which questions not to ask and which favors could be traded for the right equipment. He made careful trips to trading stations and salvage yards, always paying in cash and never buying too much from any one source. Stealth plating from a crashed spy ship, sensor jammers that pirates used to avoid detection, shield generators that had been stolen from a coalition research facility and never officially existed. Each piece of equipment was carefully selected for compatibility with their ship's systems. Chris had learned to think like a puzzle solver, finding ways to make different technologies work together even when their original designers had never intended such combinations. The most important acquisition was a new computer core. The ship's original artificial intelligence was barely smart enough to navigate between star systems. But Chris had connections in the underground tech market, and he knew where to find AI systems that had been designed for entirely different purposes. The new AI had originally been built for a gambling operation, designed to read human behavior and predict betting patterns. It was highly illegal in most star systems, but it had exactly the kind of adaptive learning capability that would be useful in combat situations. Sam Rodriguez spent weeks integrating all of these new systems into the ship's existing framework. It was like performing surgery on a patient while they were still awake. The ship had to remain functional while he completely rebuilt its internal structure. The power system upgrades allowed the ship to channel energy in ways the original designers had never imagined. Weapons that should have overheated after a few shots could now fire continuously. Engines that had been limited to safe operating parameters could now push the ship to dangerous speeds. The cooling systems were completely redesigned using spare parts from a dozen different sources. Industrial refrigeration units from cargo ships, heat exchangers from mining equipment, and cooling pipes that Sam had fabricated himself in the ship's small machine shop. Everything was connected by a web of new control systems that allowed the crew to monitor and adjust every aspect of the ship's performance in real time. If something started to overheat, they could redirect coolant. If they needed more power for weapons, they could temporarily reduce life support to non-critical areas. After 3 months of constant work, the USS Defiance looked exactly the same from the outside. The same peeling paint, the same rust stains, the same small holes from space rocks. But underneath that battered exterior, it had become something entirely different. The ship could now generate 3 times as much power as its original specifications. It could move faster and turn quicker than any transport had a right to. Its weapons were hidden but deadly, and its crew was enhanced to fight longer and harder than normal humans. Most importantly, it could think. The new AI had learned to predict and adapt to find patterns in chaos and exploit weaknesses that others would miss. It had become a predator disguised as prey. Captain Morrison stood in the engine room, looking at what his crew had accomplished. "How does it feel?" he asked Sam Rodriguez. Sam wiped grease from his hands and smiled. "Like we just built something. That's going to surprise a lot of people." "Good," Morrison replied. "Because I have a feeling we're going to need every advantage we can get." Captain Jake Morrison walked slowly around the old ship, shaking his head at what he saw. The USS Defiance looked like it had been through hell and back twice. Paint was peeling off the metal walls. Strange brown stains covered the sides where rust had eaten through the protective coating. Small holes from space rocks dotted the surface like ugly scars. This was his new command. This piece of junk floating in the repair bay of Starbase Alpha. Jake pulled out his data pad and read the orders again, hoping he had made a mistake. But no, the words were clear. He was now captain of the worst ship in the entire Galactic Defense Coalition fleet. The ship was 30 years old, which made it ancient by space travel standards. It had been built as a simple cargo transport, designed to carry supplies between colonies on the edge of human space. Back then, humans were new to the galaxy and nobody expected much from them. The ship reflected that low opinion. 2 small plasma cannons were mounted on the front. They were so old and weak that pirates would laugh at them. The engines were the kind used on mining equipment, built for reliability rather than speed or power. The living quarters were cramped and uncomfortable. Everything about the ship screamed that it was not meant for real military work. Jake heard footsteps behind him and turned to see his new crew approaching. They looked about as enthusiastic as he felt, which was not very much at all. Sam Rodriguez was his chief engineer. He was a short man with dark hair and grease stains on his uniform. Sam had been demoted twice for making changes to ships without permission from his commanding officers. The Coalition brass did not like people who thought outside the rules. Katie Walsh was his weapons officer. She was young, maybe 25, with red hair and green eyes that seemed to burn with barely controlled anger. She had graduated from the military academy just 6 months ago, but her instructors had noted that she was too aggressive for proper Coalition tactics. Chris Turner was the navigator. He was older than the others, maybe 40, with gray hair and the weathered look of someone who had spent years in deep space. He used to work on merchant ships, running cargo through dangerous areas where pirates and aliens made life interesting. Dr. Lisa Park was the ship's medical officer. She was a quiet woman with black hair and serious eyes behind thick glasses. She had volunteered for this assignment, which made her either very brave or very crazy. Maybe both. Jake gathered his crew in the ship's small meeting room. The table was old metal, scratched and dented from years of use. The chairs squeaked when they sat down. A single light panel in the ceiling flickered occasionally, casting strange shadows on the walls. "Well," Jake said, looking at each of them in turn, "I guess we all know why we're here. The Coalition brass thinks we're the bottom of the barrel. They want to keep us busy with supply runs while the real soldiers fight the war." The war he mentioned was against the hegemony, a group of alien races that had been conquering star systems for 5 years. They were cruel and efficient, and they seemed to enjoy destroying everything humans had built. The Coalition had been losing ground steadily, unable to match the enemy's advanced technology and ruthless tactics. "They think humans can't compete," Jake continued. "They think our technology is too simple and our tactics are too primitive. They want us to sit in the corner and play with our toys while the grown-ups handle the important work." Sam Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, which creaked loudly. "So what do you want us to do about it, Captain? We've got an old cargo ship with pop guns for weapons and engines that wheeze like an old man climbing stairs." "That's exactly my point," Jake said with a small smile. "They see limitations. I see possibilities. This ship may be old, but it's ours. Nobody is going to be watching us too closely. Nobody expects anything from us. That gives us freedom." Katie Walsh raised an eyebrow. "Freedom to do what?" "Freedom to be human," Jake replied. "The Coalition builds ships according to their rules and their standards. They think in terms of standardization and proper procedures. But humans have always been different. We adapt. We improvise. We find ways to win when everyone else says it's impossible." Chris Turner nodded slowly. I've seen what human crews can do when they're desperate enough. Amazing things sometimes. Dr. Park spoke for the first time since they had sat down. The Coalition medical protocols are designed for average crew members of average species. But human physiology is unique. We can push our bodies further than most aliens can imagine. Jake stood up and walked to the small window that looked out at the ship's cargo bay. Here's what I think. This ship may look like junk from the outside, but inside we can make it into anything we want. We have tools, we have spare parts, and we have something the Coalition engineers don't have. What's that? Sam asked. Human stubbornness, Jake said. The willingness to keep trying even when logic says we should give up. The ability to look at a problem and find a solution that nobody else would ever think of. He turned back to face his crew. I'm not asking you to break any major laws or do anything that would hurt innocent people, but I am asking you to forget about Coalition regulations and start thinking like humans again. This ship can be more than just a cargo transport. Much more. Katie Walsh was the first to speak. What exactly are you suggesting, Captain? I'm suggesting we take this forgotten piece of junk and turn it into something that will make the hegemony very, very nervous. Something that fights like humans fight, not like Coalition computers think we should fight. Sam Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Then he grinned. I've always thought this ship's power systems were designed by idiots. Too much waste, too many bottlenecks. I could fix that. The weapons loadout is pathetic, Katie added, but the cargo bays are big enough to hide all sorts of interesting surprises. Chris Turner pulled out his personal data pad and began making notes. I know where to get parts that officially don't exist. Modifications that would make Coalition inspectors have heart attacks. Dr. Park nodded thoughtfully. Human combat effectiveness could be enhanced significantly with the right medical support. Stimulants, reaction time boosters, pain suppressors, all within safe limits, of course. Jake felt something he had not experienced in months. Hope. Are you all saying what I think you're saying? We're saying, Sam replied, that it's time to show this galaxy what humans can really do when they stop trying to be something they're not. Jake looked around the table at his crew. 6 hours. Ago, they had been 5 failures assigned to a worthless ship. Now they were something else entirely. They were humans with a mission and the freedom to accomplish it their way. Then let's get to work, Jake said. We have a nightmare to build.